Hi there, this is my first post. I'm just going to call myself the reformed V8 junkie because I've always been a petrol head, as we say in the UK, or a piston head or a gear head. Basically, someone who from a very early age has been slightly obsessed with motorsport and planet-killing vehicles. And I've owned quite a few exotic classics and modern V8 powered vehicles. And just recently, for the first time, I decided to transition over to electric. And having recently purchased my first EV, electric vehicle, I thought I would give it a try. So far, so good. So this, I guess, is why I started the social profiles, just to kind of share my experience from someone who's not necessarily an environmentalist, not a dedicated tree hugger or anything like that. I suppose it's from the perspective of practicality and strip all the emotion out of it and just sort of focus on whether it's better, superior technology, because in a way, you know, we've gone from barefoot transportation systems to horseback to steam, I suppose, combustion, and electric just seems to be a natural progression. And yeah, just better technology. I mean, effectively, what is an electric vehicle? It's an iPhone on wheels or a mobile battery network. You know, it's there are all sorts of interesting things you can do with EVs you simply can't do with old school analog technology and combustion engine vehicles. You can have all sorts of interesting business models in addition to autonomous driving. So you can charge by the mile or the kilometer, depending on which part of the world you're in. You can have distance-based insurance billing business models. I know this is very controversial because I know a lot of people like to own the things that they purchase, but conspiracy theories aside, you know, you'll own nothing and be happy and all that sort of stuff. But in a lot of situations, particularly if you don't have the best credit rating, not owning something, having to maintain and suffer the depreciation sort of makes sense. You know, to actually have transportation as a service on demand kind of does make sense. Everything is a service. It wasn't feasible before because not everything was connected, but with ubiquitous connectivity and artificial intelligence and potentially blockchain, being able to process microtransactions, all these on-demand business models are now possible. And that's why they're being offered. I'm not necessarily sure it's to do with government control and surveillance, although privacy is an issue. And that is something that needs to be addressed, that if you don't own something, you shouldn't be, you know, restricted or, controlled by some nefarious government or corporation. I think there are ways that you can actually redact your identity but in a way, you know, provide access to that physical asset in some ways. You're not having to compromise your privacy in order to do that. I mean, the vehicle I'm driving right now is provided on a subscription model by Onto, and shortly, maybe actually a week, it took me to notice. It took me that long to notice that there is a little camera attached. I couldn't see it because it's behind the wing mirror. Sorry, the rear view mirror. And I just suddenly realized the flipping camera and everything I do, of course, is being tracked and monitored. So that was kind of weird, but I sort of understand that that's the deal. You know, I don't own this vehicle and it belongs to an organization. It doesn't belong to me. And I'm just being given temporary access to utilize it. So there are some strings attached, and privacy, unfortunately, is one of the things that I am under the contract obligated to honor, and so be it. So pros and cons, but you know, this is the thing. It's a new kind of experience from owning a fossil powered vehicle to really not owning, but utilizing a battery on wheels to facilitate, you know, personal transportation. This is all part of the Internet of Things, IoT, and the emergence of ubiquitous connected technology and automation, because eventually I won't be driving this vehicle. It will drive me. But there you go. This is my first post, and I just hope that what I share you'll find interesting, engaging, informative, non-judgmental, quite honestly. You know, I'm really going to try to remove all the ESG environmental stuff. I'm not doing this primarily to save the planet, because that's a whole, kind of can of worms. Because quite honestly, think about all the rare earth materials, cobalt, lithium, copper, etc. Where does that stuff come from? How is it extracted from the ground? Think of all the energy that's required to fabricate, assemble, and manufacture the vehicles and the batteries, and then the logistics of transporting them halfway around the world to where the customer is. Suddenly the whole narrative with regards to EVs being green starts to break down somewhat. Not entirely, but somewhat. Because, of course, if you can overcome a lot of these environmental challenges, which I think are possible, and, of course, the other issue is that, you may not have tailpipe emissions, but that energy has to come from somewhere. And in the UK, for example, right now, of course, we've won the geographic lottery in that we have an abundance of sun, surprisingly, in most parts of the UK throughout the year. Certainly wind, geothermal, tidal, etc. But they're all intermittent, which means we're going to have to deploy batteries in order to store the energy. That's going to take time, and that's going to be very expensive, and there's going to be an environmental impact in doing that. But until that happens, until we do pivot entirely to net zero, let's just face it, the energy that's going to be used to power electric vehicles is not entirely going to come from renewable sources. It's going to come from, a combination of fossil fuels, nuclear, and biofuels. And again, biofuels, that's wood chips. Last time I checked, when I put a log on the fire, it generated smoke, which is, it's a carbon emission. What can I tell you? And there's a lot of wood chip burning going on in the UK right now, and it's a little bit of a cheat because it doesn't count as a fossil fuel. So it's whatever. So there are some ethical conundrums with regards to owning an EV, but I'm not really going to discuss the environmental ESG aspects of EV ownership. It's going to be more to do with performance and practicality and user experience. So I kind of hope that makes sense. And so this is going to be a very different, I think, a take on the EV experience. And one of the reasons why I wanted to start this channel, quite honestly, is because I couldn't relate to a lot of the people who are vlogging from the EV community. They seem to be very preachy, a little bit holier than thou, and what's the word I'm trying to, sanctimonious perhaps. I've got an EV, I'm better than you, I'm saving the environment. I don't stand for any of that nonsense, I'm afraid. It's just a non-judgmental take on EV ownership. And as I said, I just want to go along this journey, bring you with me. And I'm not trying to sell a specific agenda, other than I am a tech entrepreneur, and there are other things that I'm working on right now which are closely linked to EV ownership, specifically trying to solve range anxiety. Whether that's real or not, it doesn't matter. Even if you suffer from something that may not exist, and you are experiencing some form of anxiety or range anxiety, even if it doesn't materialize and you never get stranded, isn't it nice to have the reassurance that you're never going to get stranded, and therefore you can relax? Anyway, that's besides the point. I'm just saying that I am working on a complementary technology that will hopefully solve that. But, you know, the EV charging network in the UK at least seems to be very impressive. But like anything, in the same way that the rollout and deployment of internet and 3G and stuff, and now we have broadband fiber, 4G, 5G, you know, it's taken decades. And even now, there are parts of the country, remote rural locations, where the coverage is very patchy. And I see the same trajectory with EV charging infrastructure, that if you're living in a city centre or a high population, high density population area, you're going to be fine. You'll be spoilt for choice with regards to commercial EV charging. And if you have a reliable power access to the power grid, you may even have three-phase power as I do, you can very easily install a domestic EV charger. But really it's when you're on the road, you're traveling and you're in a remote rural location, perhaps you're going on a road trip, a holiday, a vacation, and that I think is where you might run into some problems and start experiencing range anxiety. But we'll see. But like I said, you know, full disclosure, that is something that I'm working on as a sort of a business concept, very, very early stage of business venture, and that might sort of feed in to some of the stuff that I cover and discuss. So yeah, I mean, I think that should kind of give you an idea of what I'm trying to achieve, and I look forward to posting on a regular basis. And if you find it interesting, please hit the subscribe button, follow me on Instagram and all the socials, Facebook and Twitter. So look out for me. I'm the reformed V8 junkie, and V8 to EV is where you'll find me.